So, intro to logging. So what are logs? Logs are merely records. They are records of past activity or past events. So basically, it's not restricted to computers or PCs. Anything you do in the past, okay? If you have a record of what you have done in the past, we can call that record a log of what you have done in the past events or past incidents, whatever. So so in the technology world, why do we tend to keep logs? So why logs are kept or why they are created? So there are many purposes and many reasons why do we keep logs. The first one is performance optimization. So by going back to the records, we can understand what happened, okay? We can have a complete overview of what we need to do in the future. So one of the common reasons is performance optimization. We want to avoid the problems that we have actually seen in the records so that we optimize the performance. So one of the reasons is to optimize performance. The other one is to troubleshoot problems. So if a computer has a crash or if your application crashed, you want to get back to the records or the logs and see what happened, what caused the crash. If you can find out how and what did happen, okay, you'll be able to effectively troubleshoot the problem. And lastly, it is for security analysis. So if you review the logs, you will be able to see what happened, when it happened, and where did it happen, and who is responsible for what happened, so that we can tailor our security measures. And at the very end, trend analysis. So by keeping the logs, we'll be able to draw a pattern, okay, of what happened in the past and have the ability to predict the future, especially if we use AI or machine learning with the logs. Okay, now I understand what are the logs and why do we keep the logs. Let's find out what logs give us. So the first thing, by inspecting the logs, we will be able to answer many questions. Among the questions we can answer is what happened? Okay. Was it an error? Was it a security breach? We can also answer the following question. When did it happen? Usually, logs come with timestamps. Okay, so by reviewing the timestamps, we'll be able to find out when did the specific event happen. We can answer the third question. Where did it happen? I mean, where the event originated from. We can find the IP address the machine where the event occurred. We can find out, in some instances, we can find out the MAC address of the machine. We can find out other things such as the hostname of the machine from which the error has originated or the log was created. We can answer the question, who is responsible? So who did what? Who is responsible for what happened? Okay. Usually this can be a username. This can be user agent. More importantly, we want to find out the nature of the event. So, was the event successful? Or was it failure? I mean, was the person, okay, or the user who attempted to do that operation, was their attempt successful or failure? The log can give you the answer. And lastly, the result. So say a username, so say maybe a user named Damien, as shown in the walkthrough, attempted to access the SSH server, okay, at maybe or on Wednesday, as of today, okay, for 3 April. And they were able to log to the SSH server. So this way we can answer the following question. What happened? User Damien, okay, we can answer the who with user Damien, and where it had happened. Maybe they accessed the SSH server from the machine, starts with the IP 10.1.1.1. So we can answer the where it happened, when on 3 April, and who, Damien, successful. If they were able to access the server, we can say it is successful. And the result is that they logged in to the SSH server and they were able to do whatever they intended to do. Now that we understand what are logs, why do we keep the logs, and what are the questions that we can answer by looking at the logs, let's now discuss the log types. So now we decided we want to generate and keep logs in our system. We want to find out what kind of logs we can generate, store, transmit, and process in our system. So the first type of log is the application logs. These logs are related to specific applications. So if you have an app installed on your system, such as, let's have a closer example, Office. So the Office app generates logs about the performance of the application, the error it encounters, the warnings, the status, so on and so forth. These logs are called application logs. They are specific to the application. The second type of logs is the audit logs. Usually audit logs are kept for regulatory compliance. And usually audit logs are used for performance optimization, or to audit the performance and to audit security incidents. So we keep the audit logs. We also have the security logs. So in security logs, we'll be able to view events such as logins. Okay, someone logged in to a specific server, someone logged out. We can see operations on permissions. If someone changed the permissions on a specific file or a specific directory, we'll be able to see that from the security logs. We can also take a look at the logs generated from security devices or appliances, just as firewalls, IPSs. And also you can, if you have configured your router to act as a firewall, you can also view the logs of your router here. Okay, so application logs, audit logs, security logs, and we have the server logs. So the server logs are generated from a machine, a device, a computer, whatever program on a machine that acts as a server. This could be logs generated by a web server. Well, let's keep our server at the end because web server logs are of their own type. Let's say that server logs in general, they generate logs about the overall system performance. Okay, it's logs that encompass the whole system, right? The errors, the access logs. Okay, now next we have the system logs. Now, system logs look very much similar to server logs. The difference is that the machine that generated the logs, if the machine role was server machine, like a machine that has a lot of servers installed on it, we can say it's server logs. But if it was an endpoint, then it is system logs. Now, system logs, on top of what a server can generate, they can generate activities about the kernel of your operating system, the kernel activities, the kernel errors. We can also have a look at the hardware problems, hardware errors. All of these we can find them in the system logs. And then we have the network logs. Clear enough, network logs are all about the network, the traffic that has been passing through the machine, a specific machine, the connections, everything that is related to the network we can find into network logs. And we have DB logs, database logs. Here we can see an audit trail of the queries, right? The queries, no, it's not writing. Okay. The queries executed on the database. We can see the logins on the database. And lastly, we have the web server logs. Web server logs, we can see the access logs, who accessed the web server, what are the pages requested, the URLs requested, the IPs that were exchanging traffic with the web server. And most importantly, we can take a look at the HTTP response codes. Okay, now I understand the type of logs. We can have a clearer picture of what type of logs we want to generate, what type of logs we want to keep, and what type of logs we want to process. Okay, now we want to start to collect the logs. So let's talk about log collection. So how do we start collecting the logs? The first step in collecting the logs is identify the source. So we call it source identification. In this step, we want to find out where we want to collect the logs. Do we want to collect the logs from the web server? It could be the DB server. It could be that we want to collect the logs all the logs that are generated from a specific server machine on the network. So here we decide the log source. The next step you want to do is to use a log collector. The log collector, usually it is a software that's used to collect the logs and store them in the locations you configure while working on the collector. An example could be the rsyslog. rsyslog is a very popular log collector that can be configured to gather logs from various sources such as the web server logs, DB server logs, system logs, kernel logs. It can gather all these logs, collect them, and store them at default locations or locations you can configure, as we're going to see later in this video. And the third step is to choose the parameter. So let's say we want to collect the web server logs. What do we want to collect? The URLs, the IP addresses, the request types. We have to choose these as well. And most importantly is the time synchronization. We want to make sure that the time is synchronized across all the machines in a unified fashion. We don't want any time discrepancies in the log, because anytime any problem with the timing or the timestamps between the logs, it will compromise the integrity of the logs. So if you remember, guys, we talked about the log analysis process in the previous video, the stages, how it starts from the log collection, parsing, normalization, all the way till you correlate the logs and you create visualization reports. Now we're going to talk about where to find the logs. So assuming, guys, you have started to collect the logs. Maybe you have chosen to send them to a centralized location, such as a SIEM solution, or you might be just collecting the logs and storing them locally. Okay, so now we're going to talk about where to find these logs. Okay, the first thing first, before we talk about this, we have to understand the grounds we're working on. So if you are working on Windows operating system, well, that's fairly easy. You can find the logs in the event viewer. Okay, it's fairly easy. Now, if you want to, or if you are working on Linux, now here you have to do some navigation in the file system. So what are most of the logs that you need to access when you gather the logs? Okay, first let's categorize them by type. Say you want now to access the web server logs. Okay, so you have collected the logs and your web server has been working or has been up and running for like 60 days. Now you want to take a look at the logs to understand what happened and to tweak the performance of your web server. So if you are using Nginx, you can find the logs under the var directory, specifically /var/log/nginx. Under this directory, you can find all sorts of logs, the error logs, the access logs. But if you are using Apache, okay, oops, I have a mistake here. Okay, now it's correct. So if you're using Apache, the path will be a little bit different. So it will be var/log/Apache. In here, you can find, again, all sorts of logs, such as the access log or the error logs. Okay, that's for the web server log. Let's say you want to take a look at the database logs. So DB logs. Okay, so there are many sorts of DB logs that you can, DB software you can run on Linux, right? Now, we have two. The first one is MySQL. Now, the other one is PostgreSQL. So how to find the logs of these two database software? Now, well, for MySQL, you can find them under var/log/MySQL. Specifically here, you can find the error log. Okay, now, if there's a problem with your MySQL database, assuming you cannot log in or the MySQL cannot start, you can take a look at the logs here. Now for PostgreSQL, it is the same. So var, okay, log, but here comes PostgreSQL. Okay, and then you can find the logs here. Okay, so now we know where to find the logs of the most popular methods of hosting a server on Linux, specifically the web server and DB server. Now, there are some instances where we need to take a look at other logs, such as maybe PHP logs. So PHP logs can be found again var/log/php, and under this directory you can find the errors log. Okay, now say you want to take a look at the operating system logs. So in Linux we have many sorts of logs, but you can find most of them under var/log. For example, the general system logs, let me call them the system logs, they can be found under var/log/syslog. Now, if you want to audit who has logged into your system and at which time, you can do that. So say here authentication logs, you can find them again under var/log/authentication logs. All right, what about maybe firewall logs? So firewall logs, where to find the firewall logs? So it depends on what is the software. In Linux, it is IP tables. So in Linux, most of the time, it is IP tables. Where to find these logs? So again, we are under the same directory, var/log. So var/log/IP tables. Okay, now we know where to find the logs. Okay, let's now talk about how to analyze the logs. I mean, what to look for. So now I open the log file. Okay, could be error.log. How to analyze the log, how to go through the entries or the different records. We're going to talk about this now. All right, so it depends on the purpose of analyzing the logs. The method of going through the entries goes accordingly. For example, if you want to analyze logs for the sake of tweaking the performance of your server or to troubleshoot the errors, you want to analyze or to open error logs. Okay, open this file and from there look for any indications of error messages or failure to connect, failure to open, no such file or directory. These kind of things will be straight out clear in the error log. But if you want to analyze the logs for the sake of analyzing security incidents, you want to take a look at the access logs. Okay. Now, what to look for in an access log? So I want now to go through the events and comprehensively and thoroughly analyze the logs to find if there was a security incident. So one of the things we look for is multiple failed login attempts. So in the access logs, if you find that a user has been trying to log in more than 2 or 3 times at the same time while simultaneously failing to log in, this is called multiple failed login attempts. So a high number of failed logins may indicate, guess what? Brute force attack. So then you can raise an alert that a brute force attack is taking place against one of your servers. Another thing to look for is unusual login times. Okay, so here's how it goes. So let's assume that the organization you are analyzing the logs for, they have remote workers. So this is especially true for remote workers or remote access. If the workers are supplied with remote access credentials, they may log in outside of the working hours. But you have to know beforehand when are these employees or people expected to log in. For example, usually corporates, the working hours starts from 9 till, from 9, most of the time till 5. Okay, some people or some employees log in outside of this range. So you might find entries in the log file where someone has logged in maybe at 10 p.m. Okay, so this is called unusual login time because it's outside the working hours. But before you assume that someone has compromised the user or compromised the organization network, you have to establish what is called the baseline. The baseline is establishing what is normal for your organization or for your environment. So in the organization or the server you are administering, if you know beforehand or if they tell you that, yeah, our people log in outside of working hours, specifically at 10 or 11 p.m., then you could whitelist this time. But outside the range you are aware of, you can declare this as unusual login times, which means either the user is compromised user, or it is worse, compromised network. So look for unusual login times as well. Usually login times, or logins can be found in the authentication logs, usually. Okay, the third one is geo anomalies. What is geo anomalies? Geo anomalies is when someone logs in to the server or to the website or to their profile outside their regular location. You can evidently find this feature enabled in Instagram and Facebook. So let's say you reside in Dallas. Okay, so most of your logins come from Dallas. Now let's say you have maybe traveled to France and now you're logging in from Paris. So what happens, Facebook will block you here, right? Because you are logging in from a location that's outside your regular location, which is Dallas. If you log in from Paris for the first time, Facebook will block you and ask you for verification. The same here. You have to look for geo anomalies. Someone logging into the server or to the profile outside of their regular location that they use to log in or they reside in. Now the fourth one you have to look at is frequent password changes. Of course, this should happen in a short period of time. For example, let's say we have a user named, let's have a unique name here, David. Okay. Now David has changed their password around 09:45 a.m., right? Okay. Then David changed their password 10:05 a.m. and then they changed their password at 1 p.m. So this is straight out sign that David's account has been compromised. If you see multiple changes of a password, it means that the associated user could be compromised. And the fifth one is unusual user agents. And this is especially true if you are analyzing HTTP traffic. Now this is useful to look for if you want to detect anyone who could be scanning your website, like they're using a scanner. For example, Nmap scanner, they have a special user agent, and user agent actually carries the Nmap string. So if you find weird user agents in the HTTP traffic, this could be a sign that there is a vulnerability scanner or a web scanner running or scanning the website. And 6, let's say you want now to look for the cyber attacks. What are some of the cyber attacks? For example, SQL injection, XSS, directory traversal. All these are web application attacks. Now, how to detect them in the logs? Well, it depends on the payload. You have to find the corresponding payload. So I'm going to write this here. You have to find the payload. The payload should be evident in the logs. For example, an SQL payload could be, let's say I have a URL, example.com, and there is a PHP page, product, and the product ID equal to maybe 1. An SQL payload could replace the 1 with ID equal, of course, could be here an apostrophe, and then you have union select. That's an example of SQL payload. If you find this in the logs, it means that the server is under attack, SQL attack. XSS, how to detect SSS? Just look for script tags. And many other, of course, XSS could use other payloads, but most of the time it is with script tags. Or path traversal attacks. Path traversal attacks is the way to access sensitive files using or by traversing the directory structure. So if you find something like get request and //// etc password, this indicates that a path traversal attack is taking place against the server. And the same reasoning follows for other types of attacks, such as CSRF, cryptographic failures, and the list goes on. You have to find the payload that's used in such attacks. Okay. The next thing, we want to take a practical example of analyzing the logs. Before we start take a practical example, we have to put in mind that the logs can be analyzed generally using two methods. The first one is automated, which is the preferred method for many analysts, busy analysts, or the manual methods. Now, manual methods requires you to go through the logs manually, which is time consuming. But if you have time and the scope of work is in a row, okay, then it makes sense to use the manual method. You don't want to miss any log entry. So manually requires you to use command line tools in Linux. Or you can use, guess what? It's going to be a surprise, Cyberchef. The popular tool used for encoding and decoding, encryption and decryption, can also be used for analyzing the logs and applying regular expression. Now, about automated logs or automated methods to analyze the logs. You can resort to automated methods if you don't have time, okay, or if you're sure that the tool can pick up the anomalies. One of the tools that can be used to automate the analysis is Splunk. You also have Elasticsearch. You can use these to analyze the logs in an automated fashion. The purpose of analyzing authentication logs is to discover brute force attacks. So basically, we attempt to uncover brute force attacks. They can also be used to troubleshoot logging problems, and they can also be used to audit user activity after the authentication. Alright, so let's talk about the file locations. Where do these files exist on the Linux operating system? So as far as file locations are concerned, first we have under var/log/authentication log. This serves as the main authentication log file. It contains all of the authentication logs, the logs in, the logs out, the failed and the successful authentication attempts. And if after successful authentication takes place, it will actually list all of the commands executed after terminal session is opened. The other file of interest is under var/log/wtemp, and on the same directory we have utemp and we have btemp. So what's the purpose of every one of these files? So the first one, wtemp. In wtemp we can check the login and logout events. So login, and logout events. It's like keeping track of all the login and logout events. Now, as far as for utemp, it is for the recent logins or the currently logged in users. So here we have currently logged in. And lastly, as for btemp, it's for failed login attempts. It's very critical to understand the purpose of every single one of these files when you want to analyze the logs. So basically, first we define what is the purpose of analyzing the logs. Are we investigating brute force attacks? Are we troubleshooting, or are we just auditing? Okay, now let's discuss the tools. What are the tools used for the analysis? Now, because here we highlighted the video as manual analysis of Linux log files, we're going to talk about only command line tools used for analyzing log files. So the first tool is grep, and we have cut, we have sort, we have cat, we have head, tail. I'm sure you are guys familiar with these command line tools used for file processing, because at the end these are files. So in order to extract information and insights from these files, we need file processing tools. Okay. Additionally, for these files, W, U, and btemp, there are specific tools used to analyze these files. One of which is named as utmp dump. This tool can be applied or executed on any one of these files. But how to download this tool? You can just use apt install utility Linux. This will install you the suite of these tools that will allow you to analyze these files and extract insights. Okay, now after we understand the purpose of these log files, why do we analyze these log files and the analysis tools, now let's talk about a case study. So the popular example of analyzing these log files, or specifically the authentication logs, is investigating brute force attempts. So what happens in brute force attacks, an attacker tries to guess the password of a user. So after they perform an enumeration of the system, discover possible list of users, so we have root and we have admin. So what would the attacker do? They would supply a word list, password list, okay, along with every single user they have discovered, and run authentication attempts against the targeted server. Usually brute force attacks result in high number of failed attempts. So when there is a high number of failed login attempts in these logs files, we can conclude that there is a possible brute force attack. To investigate further if the attacker was successful, so here we have two outcomes after these brute force or failed attempts. The first outcome is success, and the other outcome is failure. Okay, now after the success, the attacker will log in. And after logging in, this will create another entry in the authentication logs indicating that there is a successful login. Okay, now after the successful login, the attacker will perform all sorts of activities depending on their objective. The other outcome is failure. Now here the attacker will keep generating the high number of failed login attempts. So to find out if the attacker was successful in getting access to the server, we're going to need to look at first high number of failed attempts followed by a successful attempt with the same user, either root or admin or any other user. How do we find this out? We're going to need to investigate the authentication logs. Okay, after we discover, or after we investigate the authentication logs and we discover that there's a successful login attempt, we can safely use the temp, utemp. Specifically, we can take a look at utemp to make sure that the attacker was indeed successful in their brute force attacks, because if that's the case, they will have a currently logged in session under utemp, which can be viewed under utemp. So the first step is investigating the failed login attempts in the authentication log file. Once we find a successful attempt, we can use utemp to confirm the session, and then we can follow up again with authentication logs to see what kind of commands the attacker has executed on the terminal server to find out what was their objective. Were they trying to exfiltrate data, or were they trying to create persistence in the system? Let's take an example and see how this works. Okay, so in the scenario here we have authentication logs and we have wtemp. Remember that wtemp lists lists history of the login and logout events. Remember also that utemp, or the contents of utemp, can be viewed using a specialized tool such as the one we mentioned earlier, utmp dump. So we're going to use this now. utmp dump utemp. Right, so let's go up. While analyzing log files, it's very important to pay attention to the timestamp, because you want to create a chronological chain of events starting from the first failure or the failed attempt, followed by the successful attempt, and then by the commands the attacker executed on the machine. So it's very useful if you take a note of the timestamp. Alright, so here we can see a history of the logins along with the user that performed the login operation. And as you can see, lastly, we see another user, Cyberchef. And we can take note also of the host name or the IP address from which the login attempt was originated. We see lastly that the last IP address or the last login attempt came from the same IP address, which is totally different from previous IP addresses. We can establish a pattern of safe logins by taking a look at the IP address, which originates the login attempt. So you can see here the IP address is the same all the time and the user is the same, which was root. At the end, we see a different IP address, right? But with the same username we saw earlier, and then followed by a login attempt from a different username this time and the same IP address. So you have to investigate where does this IP come from. To find the answer, we're going to first need to take a look at the authentication logs. Let's first establish a hypothesis that indeed there was an attack, okay, that started with failed attempts followed by a successful attempt. So first we're gonna need to take a look at the failed login attempts. Right, so let's see here, what can we do? Authentication logs. So we can use this one-liner to view statistics about the login attempts started by the user. This will give us, as you can see, that's a combination of cat, grep, cut. Let's first use the first one, the failed attempts. See how many failed attempts we have. Okay, as you can see, guys, we have a lot of failed attempts from different users. So the first line, March 6, 6/31, we have a failed attempt coming from this username and this IP address targeting the SSH server. We previously saw this IP address while investigating the WDM file. And we saw that there was two logins coming from this IP address, one as the root and other one as Cyberjunkie. We're gonna have to uncover why this happened. So we see failed login attempts from the same IP address, sometimes using the username admins, other times using backup user. And lastly, we see another user, server admin, service account, all coming from the same IP address. It's safe to assume that we have a failed brute force or failed login attempts coming from this IP address, which makes us confirm the theory of a brute force attack taking place. So after these failed attempts, we want to find out if it resulted in successful login. To find the answer, we're going to have to list all of the successful login on the server. So we're going to view the successful logins by using this command. So basically here we are using cat and gripping the word accepted. Okay, take a look here. We have one successful login, the root user, but from this IP address. We have established a baseline of safe activity coming from this IP address. So we're going to ignore this one. Now the other one is another accepted login from the same user, which happens to be root, on the suspicious or coming from the suspicious IP address. If you take a look at the timestamp, it is 6/31/40. So if you take a look, if you go up and see where it started to brute force on the user root, so as you can see, it started at 6/31/39. These were failed attempts, but as you can see, after this very second, we have a successful login on this timestamp coming from the same IP address. So we have now established a pattern of successful brute force attack against the server. It started with several failed attempts using several users or different users until it ended with a successful attempt using the root user account. And we see another login from the same IP address, but this time it is after 1 minute and 4 seconds of the first attempt. And then after 5 minutes, we have another successful attempt, but from a new user named Cyberjunkie. And this IP address is the same. It looks like the attacker has added the username after they successfully logged in as root. See, there is a gap here in time between this attempt and this attempt. It's a gap of 5 minutes, which means the attacker, after they logged in as root, they have performed a series or executed a series of commands that in turn enable the attacker to log in as different user from the same IP address. So now we have confirmed the hypothesis. There was a brute force attack that took place on the server. The attack was successful. Now let's find out the mystery of this account. Where did it come from? To find the answer, we're going to need to investigate again the authentication logs after this timestamp. So let's go ahead and use cat authentication log and use less. I'm going to ignore these. Remember that that's where it started. Let's see here. At this exact timestamp, there was a login using the user root. Let's go up, start from here. So accepted password for root from this IP address. Let's follow on the chain of events after this login attempt, because all of the things that the attacker did on the machine was after this attempt. Okay, so scrolling down, we see some other attempts. Connection closed by here. It's attacker is concluding the other failed attempts on other users. Scrolling down, we see another login again on this timestamp. All right, now we can see the commands. So here, exactly at this timestamp, 6:34, the attacker has added or created a group named Cyberjunkie, and then added the group to etc groups and etc shadow. Now we started to uncover what happened and where did the Cyberjunkie user come from. So a new group was created, and here attacker created another user named Cyberjunkie with these parameters as the UID and group ID. And as you can see, guys, here the username has a home directory and can log in with bash shell. Okay, scrolling down, we can see here at this exact timestamp, you can see that the attacker has changed or created the password for the username Cyberjunkie. Scrolling down, the attacker also added Cyberjunkie to sudo, the group sudo, so that Cyberjunkie can execute system commands as sudo or otherwise in an elevated mode. Scrolling all the way down, we see the attacker disconnected here, and then they logged in exactly March 6, 6:37, and they logged in as Cyberjunkie, and the session opened for that user. Okay, what happened later? Now the attacker, what they did, they let's see here, they executed a system command. The command was cat to view the password hashes stored at etc shadow. And then the attacker closed the session opened by a user root and continued as Cyberjunkie. And here we can see another command. The attacker downloaded or used curl to download this script, line per. Okay, let's find out what does the script do. I can copy this and open up this. Okay, basically we can just Google line per GitHub to take a look at the main repository. So it's Linux persistent toolkit. Okay, going back to the logs, later on the attacker closed the sessions. Okay, so now we can conclude what happened. The attacker started with a brute force attack that ended with a successful attempt, and then they created another user for persistence and downloaded a script to establish persistence on the machine. So that is what happened during this case study. Before we start cutting and performing all sorts of file processing commands or operations on the file, it's worth taking a look at the file to understand the structure. So we can cat apache -n 10, displaying the first 10 lines. So these are the first 10 lines. Great. Now, before we start analyzing the logs, it's good rule of thumb if you're analyzing a log file using command line tools in Linux is to understand how many fields there is in the log file. So here, this is an IP address, right? This constitutes the first field, right? Now, the next field is the dash. And the other dash is considered as field. So up until now, we have 3 fields. Look at the delimiter or the separator between these fields. It is a space. So the separator here is a space between all the fields. Okay. And now we understand the fields. The first field, the second field, third, and fourth. Look at this. This is the fourth field. You cannot say this is the full field. I know, because it looks like this is a complete field. It constitutes the timestamp, but it is not, because there is a space here and it separates the full two components of the timestamp into 2 separate components, the first one and the other one. So that's a field, and this is another field. So why this is useful? Because if you want to use command substitution, such as sed, or you want to cut the fields or extract them, you have to understand the type of delimiter used and the number or the order of the field, number-wise. We can find them right here. These are the URLs accessed. To extract them, we're going to have to use cut. So cut. So here we can say cat apache log and then cut. To use cut, we're going to have to specify the delimiter. The delimiter here between the fields is a space. So between 2 apostrophes, we can put a space. And then we can use -f to specify which field we want to extract. -f takes a numeric or a number. it should be the number of the field. So based on the order, of course. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's at the 7th field. If we apply this here, look at this. Now we have extracted all the URLs. Okay, now back to the log file. We can find the response codes here. 200, 404, 200. So to find or to extract the stats about the 200, we want to first extract the relevant field. So knowing that this is the 7th field, 7, 9, 7, then you have 9 and 10. So it's as a 10th field. Let's try this out. Nope, that's wrong. Let's go back and reorder. So that was 7, 8, yeah, 9. So it is 9, not 10. If we try now the cut, yeah, now we extracted the response codes. So you want only to count the 200 response codes. To do that, you're gonna have to filter out the 200 response codes, or we can first sort the response codes numerically, in an ascending order. Sort -n. Okay, as you can see now, we sorted the response codes in an ascending order: 200, 404. Okay, now we want to use unique and then -c. Unique -c eliminates the duplicates, okay, and then tells me how many occurrences of each entry. So now I can see that 200 has 52 occurrences and 404 has 19 occurrences. Now to the original command, viewing the first 10 lines of the log file. Now the IP address lies at the very first field, number 1. So if you want to extract IP addresses, you're going to go back to your command. Instead of 1, you can say -f1. 9, sorry, -f1. Now we extracted the IP addresses. We have this file. We're going to unzip the file. Indeed, we have one encoded file, text file, another one is access log. Let's go ahead and upload the access log. So we go to browser, and from here we open Cyberchef. So right here, on the right pane, we have the arrow here, the icon that shows the arrow. We're gonna click on this and supply an input. Desktop, no, root, rooms, task 8. Let's make sure the path is correct. Rooms, intro, log analysis, task 8. Intro, log analysis, task 8, access log. We're gonna upload this and see, guys, the log analysis file or the log file has been loaded right here to the input. Now we can perform all sorts of operations using the recipe. To pick up a recipe, we have to take a look at the left pane and search for the recipe we want to use. It could be encoding, decoding, encryption, but when you analyze logs, you want to use regular expressions. So regular expression, and we drag this here. You can adjust the view by dragging this a little bit to the left. Okay, right. So here in the regex, we paste the regular expression. So we built our own expression and we paste it here, and then we click on bake. But we assume that you don't know how to use regular expressions, or you are not well versed in using regular expression. So what you want to use, you want to click on the drop down here and pick up one of the preloaded regular expressions. We can click on IPv4 and we see we have a new expression loaded or popped. And as you can see, guys, on the output pane, we can see the IP addresses highlighted or extracted. You can choose a more neat method of displaying the extracted information by clicking on the output format and selecting list matches. And indeed, guys, as you can see, I have the IP addresses extracted using regular expression. I can go ahead and save this to a file. So save output to a file. We're gonna name this IPv4. We're gonna double click on this and open the file. So now we have the IP addresses extracted from the log file. Immediately, we have a text editor open up. We can Control F or click on Control F on the keyboard, type Ctrl F and search for an IP that starts with 212. Now we have one entry here marked at line 73. Let's see if there is another entry. Looks like we are stuck at this line, meaning there is only one IP address whose beginning is 212. Okay, now we want to extract the requests. Before we extract the request, we have to find them first at the row log file. So this is the row log file here. You can see the first line, the get request. We have a get request, and the request goes to the main landing page. This is the path. Let's take another example. This one. Take a look at this one. Here. So this one, get /DNS query name, DNS scan, etc. So this is the request. We want to extract these requests, the URL that is requested. Again, regular expressions come to the rescue. So we expand this, and we can see a preloaded regular expression that uses or extracts URLs. Once we click that, take a look here, guys. We have the URLs extracted. Well, these are the requests made, but we can extract more useful information or more detailed information about the request using Unix file path. If we click on Unix file path, we can extract other information about the files requested in the get request. And take a look here, we have many entries. We're gonna save this to a file, call this requests, and we're gonna open a file. Okay, open up. Okay, these are the full requests, and there are a lot. We have to find the one that has base 64 encoding. So we're gonna quickly sift through the entries until we encounter something that is base 64. Scrolling down, 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 down. Okay, here we go. Look at this one. This is a request that is encoding base 64. We have this one as well. Let's copy this. But it's not completely base 64, it's only this part. So I'm going to put this away. It's going to be the answer. Yeah, so let's copy this, go back to Cyberchef. And I'm going to delete this recipe. And I'm going to delete the file, paste a new input here. And from here, I'm going to use base 64, from base 64. Oops, look what we have. So it's base 62 I selected, which is wrong, from base 64. Okay, now it works. Now, usually when the network is large, you have a lot of endpoints, a lot of servers, and a lot of network traffic, a lot of systems. You want to centralize the logs. So we call this process is log centralization. In log centralization, what happens? We gather the logs from different sources, from endpoints, from servers. It could be web server, DB server, SSH server, you name it, from network devices. So every type of these machines or of these devices generate logs. We want to collect all of them and store them or forward them into a central location to centralize the log management. We call this log centralization. Okay. Now, basically, to generate these logs, to collect these logs and forward them to a central location, you need a tool called SIEM, the SIEM or SIEM device. Usually, SIEM can be run on a dedicated machine to store and process the logs for further analysis. An example of SIEM is Splunk. Another one is Elasticsearch. All right, now we have talked about the logs, how to collect the logs, log centralization. Now we want to talk about log analysis. This is where we start analyzing the logs. So now, up to this point, we have collected the logs, and let's say we have forwarded all the logs to Splunk. Now we can start analyzing the logs. But how do we start analyzing the logs? First, we want to define the data sources. In Splunk, if you have checked out my tutorials on Splunk, we always define the data source from which we want to parse and analyze the events. The first thing in log analysis is to select the data source. In Splunk, you can do that from the, so Splunk comes like this. You have the main interface here, or the main interface that displays the events. On the left side, you have the fields. Among the fields, there is the source. The source allows you to check or to select the data source. It can be from web server, it can be from SSH server, it can be the router logs. So you select the data source. The next thing we want to do, the next process is parsing the logs. Remember that logs come from different sources, which means the log will come in different formats. So in order to analyze the logs effectively, we want to understand how every format works, but this is kind of impossible because you're not going to be able to parse every single log file from every single source individually. You need an engine. The engine's job is to parse the logs. So usually logs are parsed using tools or engines. So in the case of Splunk, it is parsed by Splunk engine. The same goes for Elasticsearch. Or there are tools to parse the logs. They are called log parsers. So not every time you want, or not every time you will be able to afford having a tool like Splunk or Elasticsearch in your environment. Sometimes you want to do that manually. So you will use tools such as log parsers to parse the logs. Usually breaking the logs into more components, understandable components, so that the analysis process becomes easier. After we selected the data source, parse the logs, we want to do what is called the normalization. So normalization, it is a complementary step to parsing the logs. We want to bring the logs into a unified standard format. The unified standard format will allow us to effectively analyze logs without being distracted by different formats and different structure of every single log file. This can be done after the parsing and also is available in Splunk or in SIEMs in general. All right, now we have collected the logs from the data source we want to monitor. We have parsed the logs and we have now the logs in an understandable format. The next step is sorting the logs. Now we want to select an important aspect of the logs, and according to that aspect, we're gonna sort them. For example, the logs can be sorted according to time. So we have a chronological order of the events, from oldest to newest, or from the most recent to the oldest. We can opt to source the logs by the source. Also the event type. For example, we want to see the logs that indicate failure or success operation. Maybe we want to sort the logs according to the severity of the incident. Okay, sometimes you are analyzing the logs or the logs generated by an IDS. An effective way of analyzing IDS logs is to sort them by severity. Okay, after we sort the logs, the next step, we want to classify the logs. So we call this, the next step is classification. Classification is similar to sorting. After we have sorted the events according to time or the important parameters to our analysis, we can then give them labels and categories. The labels and categories allow us to easily filter the logs according to the category we want to focus at, or the classification we want to focus at. Next step is correlation, which is the most important step in security analysis. In this step, we bring logs from different sources and we correlate them, meaning we find the missing link between the logs. Okay. We can find the link between the logs based on common denominators, such as the severity of the message between different logs. It could be IP addresses showing up in more than one log type. We can also find the link by using URLs. And the last step is visualization and reporting. In visualization or reporting, we use charts, graphs to depict or to narrate a story, okay, based on the logs. So we can tell stakeholders or organization managers of what happened, because you're not gonna bring the log file and show it to your manager. you want to create a story. So you do that by using visualization and reporting. And first thing first, we want to make sure that rsyslog is installed on the machine. We can do that by issuing the following command: sudo systemctl status rsyslog. Okay, so based on the output, we can see that rsyslog is active and running. So it is actively collecting the logs. So what rsyslog keeps the logs? It can be found under etc rsyslog. Here you can see the configuration files, not the log, of course. Here we can take a look at how rsyslog is collecting the logs and where it is storing them. For example, let's take a look at the configuration file here, 50 default. Okay, scrolling up. So this is the start of the configuration file, and we can see the various locations where it stores the log and the description of every single log. So this one means that this is a comment. So mail, everything that has to do with mails is stored under var log mail log. Scrolling down, we can see all the locations where it stores the logs. So most of the logs are stored under var/log, and the file is shown. So what we can do here, you can play around with this file, okay, or you can create your own configuration file and forward the logs. For example, let's now take a look at this one, 99. Okay, so this configuration file forward the logs to this location under var log web server 02 rsyslog cron.log. So this file holds the logs, but for what? As you can see, this is the description of the logs. Forward logs to seam02 at this IP address. So it's not only storing the logs at this path, it's also forwarding them to another machine on this IP address that's listening on this port. So we call this is another log collector that is using a listener to listen for all the forwarded logs. So we can not only store the logs locally, as shown here, we can also forward them into another machine for centralization. We call this centralization. So it's very clear that it's collecting cron jobs, right? So the cron jobs, the log of the cron jobs, okay, are forwarded or stored locally on this location and forwarded to this machine as well. Let's say we want to gather all the SSH logs and store them in a specific location on this machine. So we start by creating a specific configuration file, nano etc. Okay, before we open the file, okay, or before we start configuring the file, you can start the file by appending this line. You can follow this method with all the configuration files you want to create. First, put this line at the head of the file, okay, and then you can also copy this as is. Let's copy these. Okay, and we're going to paste them here. Now we're going to change. So instead of collecting cron jobs, we want to collect SSH logs. SSH logs are generated by the SSH server. So you want a descriptive word of the SSH server. Usually SSH server is running on the SSHD service. So SSHD, okay, all the logs generated by the service. We want to forward them or store them into a central location, but locally on this machine. So we're going to choose var log web server 02, but here instead of cron, we're going to rename this into SSHD, right? Okay, now we have configured our syslog to collect SSH logs and store them in a configured or location that we have configured. Now, after waiting like for 1 to 2 minutes, let's take a look now at the entries that have been generated in the log file. So we're going to cd to var log web server. Alright, looks like we need to restart the rsyslog for changes to take effect. So we're going to execute sudo restart rsyslog. Okay, after waiting for some time, we can see a new log file has been generated. Okay, let's now take a look at this log file. So cat r/log, and let's now, assuming that the file is long enough, we're gonna use head-n to print out the first 30 lines. Okay. So this is an example of a log file. You can see there is a timestamp, and here we can see the machine, the service, and we can see the message. So according to the logs, we can see that there is a user trying to log in, invalid user stanchion from this IP address, receive disconnect for invalid user, check pass user unknown, authentication failure. So we see repeated instances of authentication failures by this username originating from this IP address. Okay, so this is a security maybe failure, we can call it. Now usually if these attempts were repeated consecutively over a specified or over a span of maybe more than 5 to 10 minutes, it could indicate a brute force attack. Okay, that was an example of how to collect the logs, or to start the log collection process and forward them to a central location using r/log. Now let's talk about Windows log analysis.
On the right pane, we have
First, let's start with the format. What is the file format used in recording Windows event logs? The files can be found either in EVT or EVTX extension. And specifically, the location can be found in most Windows OS versions, Vista and newer. They can be found under this location. And here you can find all of the event log files for the Windows operating system. Now, how can we analyze the Windows event logs? Say that we have picked up on one of the event logs located under this directory and we want to analyze them. So there are multiple options here. First one is Windows Event Viewer, which is a built-in tool in Windows operating system. And it will be the subject that we will talk about in this course. Other tool is Timeline Explorer. Timeline Explorer can be used to analyze event logs, as it converts the original format EVT, EVTX into CSV. So in Timeline Explorer, it can be viewed as CSV. ulog viewer can also be used to analyze Windows event logs. In fact, ulog viewer can be used to analyze multiple event logs from multiple formats and from different operating systems, including Linux and Windows. Okay, now let's talk about the categories of Windows logs. First, we have Windows logs, and the other category is applications and services logs. So what is the difference here? The first difference is that Windows event logs are built in. As the name suggests, Windows logs are about Windows logs, right? It is actually about system events. Now, applications and services logs, we dig deep into this when we want to analyze, or when we want to take a look into more specific logs on applications and services like sysmonitor, SSH logs, Powershell logs. These are application-specific logs or service-specific logs. They can be viewed under this category. Now, if we take a look at an example here, as you can see here, that's what I'm talking about. Here we have the Windows logs, and then we have applications and services logs. As you can see, under Windows logs, we have the application. Now, the application under Windows logs, as the name suggests, they are about application and software logs. Most of the time, it's about the application and programs come with Windows operating system. And then we have the security. It's about the security events and system-related components. As you can see, here we can have a look at process creation events, process termination, setup. Actually, yeah, security here. And also we can view, by the way, under security, we can also view group policy events, local and group policy events. Setup, here we can see the installation logs. Once you install an app or a program, you'll see the related logs about its success or failure under setup. System, again, it's about system components. You can see information about system events, errors, warnings. Forwarded events, now here are the logs sent from hosts residing in the same network other than this host. Okay, so these are Windows logs. Now let's talk about application and services logs. So we said that in applications and services logs, we can see logs about specific applications and services, such as we have the OpenSSH logs. Also, we can see Windows PowerShell log. Here, the logs are focused on debugging and scripts events. So when you execute a PowerShell script, you will have debugging information about whether the execution was successful or failed. You can see these logs under Windows PowerShell. Another way to view Windows PowerShell logs is to navigate to Microsoft, and then we have Windows. And under Windows, we look for PowerShell. Okay, and then we have the operational. Here we see detailed PowerShell logs focused on security, audit, and compliance. So whenever we execute a PowerShell script, we see the event log about this script block execution here, the module logs. When you load a PowerShell module, we see the logs here as well, and administrative action in addition to that. Okay, so now let's take an example. Let's say we're gonna talk in detail about PowerShell later, so I'm going to take another example. Open SSH, operational. There are no sample logs here. No problem. Let's take a look at this one. Okay. So we want to analyze a specific log into here. We have two tabs. We have the general and we have the details. Here we see an XML view. We can also have the option to have an XML view of the log entry. And we have a friendly view, which is a friendly parsing of the XML details. So we have two tabs, the general and the details. First one here, under the general, we can see description of the event. A new process has been created. Down there we have these columns. So we have the log name. The log name is self-explanatory. It tells you where the record came from. So in this case, it came from security, meaning Windows logs, security. Okay, next we have the source. It is Microsoft Windows Security. That's the channel. And then we have the event ID. As you can see, event ID or event IDs are numbers that identify the event type and provide more insight. Usually event IDs are categorized and documented under Microsoft documentation, where every ID refers to a specific event description, such as process creation, termination, so on. The level, here we have information. Usually we have multiple levels of event IDs or event logs. Information tells us that the process has been created, but there are no issues related to the event. Now other categories or other levels may include errors, warning, critical, and verbose. We have the error that executes the process. It's not available for this one. The logged, here we have the timestamp. The timestamp is of critical importance when analyzing event logs, because it helps you create the chain of events, construct a chain of events where you'll be able to put identify the start and the end of a specific incident. Keywords here are attributes to the event that provide more description. In this case, it is audit success. And here we have the computer. And then we can go to details to find more information, such as here we can see the administrator. Administrator is the subject username, the username who executed the process in this case. Here we have the new process name. What was the process executable? We can have the full directory path, the command line in case the process executed the command. We can see the command here under command line. And the parent process name. The parent process name indicates the name of the process that spawned this process. So the event here is process creation. Which process was created? It is the CMD. But what was the process that called this process? It is called the parent process name, and in this case it is PowerShell. Okay, now we talked about some of the tools that can be used to analyze Windows events. So event viewer, cover this. Timeline Explorer, it converts the file into CSV. And we have ulog viewer. So ulog viewer, it's open here in my case. This is the tool, and as you can see here, I have Windows event log files. Now you can you can import a new log file using this add log files. Here you can select the log file and import it. The cool thing about this is that you don't have to go through all of the might be voluminous events in the Windows event viewer. You can have them here in a nice format. At the same time, you can use the filter to narrow down your focus. For example, if I'm looking for a specific log ID or event ID, let's say PID here, this is the process ID. Let's say I want to look for specific event ID, such as maybe the process creation ID. The process creation ID is 4688. So here I can use 4688 and filter. In the case of the log file imported to this instance of ulog viewer, it doesn't have process creation events. Rather, it has other types of events. The first one here is process or maybe user creation. Let's see. No, not this one. If you want to search for user creation events, you can use the event ID 4720. Yeah, so as you can see, we have one event ID that shows a user has been created. Also, we have the PID and the TID. The TID is the thread ID. PID is the process ID, and here's the device name, and of course, most importantly, is the timestamp. You can click on View More to have a look at more details. So you see, it's similar to the friendly view in the Windows Event Viewer. And by the way, we'll take a look at how to filter event logs in the next section.
Right. So here we're required to filter logs. We go to the right on the action pane, click on the filter current log, and we go to all event IDs 4104. So here we click on OK, and we will be presented with all of the IDs or events that have the ID 4104. Now all of the events depict PowerShell command being executed. So if you click on the first one, for example, you see in the details pane here down here, you see more details about the event. For example, you see the source, the event ID, and here in the middle you see more information about the context of the command. Click on the details. We see kind of here we have XML view, which I prefer, and we have friendly view. Now in this video we're going to examine the XML view, and we will extract the answer from this view. As you can see from the first one, there is no command, right? If you see the next one, also there is no command. On to the third one. So as you can see here, we have many number of events, right? And going through these events, when you have large number of events, is kind of exhaustive. So that's why in the next section, we will look at command line tools to filter the events and extract the answers directly. But for now, we're gonna just go through these and see what is the second command. So here we have get win event, prompt, the same command, also the same. So you're looking for a PowerShell command, provider, prompt, if I filter through the date, this is from the newest to oldest, now oldest to newest, prompt, get, this is the first command, I guess, as you can see. Now these are my commands actually that I executed. So I'm gonna have to go down and filter starting from here. So as you can see, the second entry, but you have to filter from oldest to newest. All right, the second entry gives who am I. Move out from here and we go to Windows logs. Application and service logs, Windows PowerShell. The GUI interface is useful if you are filtering for a specific event and if you know where you're looking, right? But if you have large number of events, all right, and you are trying to find, you're not given an event ID, you're not given any information, so it's kind of painful to sift through all of these events. That's why it's recommended you use the event viewer GUI interface along with a command line utility like the ones we will examine now. So keep this open, open the command prompt, and here we will use a tool called win event utility. So I'm gonna clear here. Okay, so win event util. All right, I think we have to remove the okay. So in order to get the help menu, we have to type /?. So here we get the help menu. If you scroll up, you see here first the definition. Windows Events Command Line Utility enables you to retrieve information about event logs and publishers, and install and uninstall event manifest, rank queries, and export, archive, and clear logs. It's pretty much useful tool if you want to manipulate events, filter through events, run queries. Of course, the best use case is to couple it with event viewer, the Google interface. Usage, you can use either the short or long. For example, the options or the commands we're given here are these. So this is the short name and this is the long name. You can use either one of them in your command. All right, for example, if you want to enumerate the logs, you can type el or enum logs, which will list the log names. The same with the rest. So you can, as you can see, get log configuration information, modify configuration of a log, list event publishers. You can even query events from a log file, which we will do later. And here we have the command options. So additional to these commands, we can use these right here. So slash starts with slash, and we either use a short name, which is R, or remote, and value. So slash R, we have semicolon and value, or colon, sorry, and value. So what this does, if specified, run the command on a remote computer, value is the remote computer name. This is in case you are in an Active Directory environment. Slash U, username, value if you're looking for username, slash P, password if you're looking for passwords, and here uni for Unicode, etc. So what was the first question? How many log names are in the machine? So we have to enumerate the logs, right? So what we do, when event util exe, and we use the short name, which is el, enumerate the logs. All right. And here I'm gonna just pipe the output to another command to just find or count the lines. So find slash n slash c slash v, just to count the number of lines. So as you can see, we have 1701 log names. If I don't count the lines, execute this, as you can see, it will list all of the log names. So let's get back to the help menu and look for the query commands. So as you can see here, we have on line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have the query events or QE. Query events from a log or log file. So here we can just, as the name suggests, we query events from a log or log file. Now we're required to find the definition of this. This has to do with using the command. So if you don't know how to use the command, you can get more information about specific command. For example, when event util.exe, and the command name is QE, and we type slash question mark to get the help menu of the specific command EQ. Let's go up. Query log, it is QE. So here, QE. Okay. So this is the help menu for using this command, which is query events. So as per the definition, read events from an event log, log file, or using structured query. That's the definition. What option would you use to provide a path to a log file? Let's examine the help menu for this. So when I use QE, I'm instructing the Windows event utility to query a specific event, okay, or to query a specific event from a file. How do I do that? That is the user here. So we type the tool name QE for short or query events for long, the path of the file, complete path if you don't know where it is, and here the option value, option value. Now let's take a look at the options here. The options is if you are using a file or if you're querying events from file, you have to define the option /f for short or log file, all right, colon true. If you are querying from a log file, you put true. If you're not querying from a log file, you put false. And here /q or the query colon the value, here you put your query. If you're looking or if you're filtering for a specific event ID, you put the query here. So we have another tool called get. Again, let's make this bigger. Font size 56. All right. So get when so the example one is using the cmdlet when you get to an event to get all the logs from a local computer, all the logs with no filtering. So this command gets all the event logs on the local computer. Logs are listed in the order that get-when event gets them. Classic logs are retrieved first, followed by the new Windows event logs. It's possible for a logs record count to be null, which is blank, or 0. All right. So let's type this. Get-when event dash list log. So we list all of the logs Example 7. Get event log provider names that contain a specific string, which is very useful if you're looking, if you're searching for, if you have a specific string in your mind. What to do is to use this command. So get one event, list provider. The provider here is policy, but in our case, the provider will be Powershell. So let's copy that. Paste here, replace policy with Powershell. Copy that. So we have, as you can see, the first one name is Powershell. Log links Windows Powershell. The next one is Microsoft Windows Powershell. The third one is this one. So in example 8, we aim to get the event IDs that the event provider generates. So if you have an event provider in mind and you want to get all of the event IDs that it has generated, you use this command. So let's copy the command first to our local machine and modify on the command to answer the question. So get one event, list the provider. In this case, it is Microsoft Windows group policy, and from table, we list the ID and the description. In this case, we want to list the IDs of the Microsoft Windows PowerShell as the log provider. So we replace the provider here with Microsoft Windows PowerShell. We copy that, and we get all of the IDs pertaining to this log provider. Okay, get back to the first point where we used the find/c/v double quotes in Windows Event Utility, but in this case we can't use that with PowerShell. We have to use measure objects to measure the number of lines. Measure object. So the count is 192.